Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webcast, Hiring Equity, How to Build Your Culture Without Building Culture, sponsored by Cangrade. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and can be submitted for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on the Q&A tab in your webinar controls and type them there. A new tab will open in your browser with the webcast survey. Please be sure to complete it as soon as the webcast is ended. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Cangrade for their presentation.
Thanks so much for that lovely introduction. My name is Leanna Epstein, and I'm going to be talking to you today about how to build your culture without building culture. I like to start with a little introduction of me, who I am, and why it is that I'm talking to you about culture today. I have over a decade of experience generating and implementing strategic insights that help organizations to drive growth. My background is in data analytics, data science, and social psychology. I have made my career leveraging cutting-edge research in psychology and combining it with data science and machine learning in order to drive organizational growth across a wide range of sectors. Across all of these sectors, the problems stay consistent. Organizations want to get great people in the door who will help drive their mission and their bottom line forward. They want to hire people who will thrive and who will perform well year over year. In my current role, I am the head of analytics for Cangrade. We're a pre-hire and talent management assessment company, and we're working to drive talent management decisions with accurate and efficient diagnoses of soft skills in particular. We have a soft skills oriented assessment that tries to make sure that you're getting the folks that match your needs. So let's dive into our topic for today, culture fit. Culture fit is good for business. This is a fairly decent truism as far as truisms go. This shouldn't be news to any of you working in this area, but it's really important to establish as a baseline. Everyone loves culture fit, so this isn't a particularly hard sell. 95% of job seekers are after it. 62% of them would even take less money to get a job that provides it. And HR leaders and C-suite executives are sold on it as well. Everybody sees it as a crucial component of what makes someone the right person for the job. Why is that? What can culture fit do? Why is it that everybody's so excited about it? A workplace culture that brings out the best in your employees, rather than frustrating them and inhibiting their work quality, is the difference between good metrics and great metrics. Hiring candidates who align with your goals is important for retention and for employee happiness. When employees are performing well and when they fit to the culture, they're much more likely to be happy about what they're doing and to stay with their organization. Similarly, when an employee feels that they fit in with the workplace culture, rather than being marginalized by it or sidelined by it or excluded from it, and that they feel that they have a clear voice in contributing to the culture and how that culture is shaped in their organization, they're much more likely to perform well and to stay in their role over time. Having this positive company culture that really engages and involves employees is going to be a critical component of any successful organization. So overall, culture fit has a positive effect because it nurtures and motivates employees rather than hampers them and annoys them. It's a pretty basic component of trying to manage people well within your organization, but often it's seen as a nice to have rather than a need to have. And I think it's really critical, especially in this competitive hiring market, to hold on to this idea of culture fit as an essential component of your organization. It's not a nice to have, it's a need to have. Sometimes the warm and fuzzies are what makes the difference between an organization that's just keeping on the same trajectory and one that's really able to accelerate and supercharge their growth because they're leveraging their employees and the headcount they have as best as possible. So then what's the catch? Why did we start this presentation saying that you want to build culture without building culture, in those air quotes? Why can hiring for culture fit be problematic? If everybody agrees that it's wonderful, if it does wonderful things for people, what's the problem? The problem is this. When you have someone hiring for culture fit, whether it's a recruiting manager, hiring manager, anyone who's involved in the talent management process, it tends to be that like attracts like. When you're looking to hire someone as a human with your own set of thoughts about who might be successful in the role, you tend to think about who was successful in the role before, or who reminds you of you, or who reminds you of somebody who's succeeding right now that's sitting next to you in your office, assuming you're one of those people who are back in the office now. That homogeneity, that pull towards hiring people that are like other people who already work for you, is overall going to make your business much less profitable. Essentially, hiring for culture fit is something that is inherently inclined towards having a lot of bias built in to that process. Teams often will simply look to find more team members that are like themselves. And this can lead to things such as groupthink, where nobody has a different opinion and you end up with a really bad choice, simply because everyone is coming at things from the same perspective all the time. So what's the answer? What's the antidote to this homogeneity problem? Diversity. We talk about diversity a lot, and we think about it sometimes as a quota system or checkbox, as hiring a certain number of women or certain backgrounds or ethnicities. But when I talk about diversity, I really mean it in the most basic sense of the word. The idea is that people come at the same thing from different perspectives. This may be their educational background, the years of education they received, the industries they've worked in prior to your organization, whether they've been in roles with small companies or big companies, and a variety of other components. Sometimes even just approaching a role at work, having been a parent, changes the way that you manage or you participate in teams. It doesn't make it better or worse as a perspective. It simply means that you're going to approach a task differently, potentially from someone who doesn't have kids at home. Having this diversity of perspectives, this diversity of backgrounds, and this wealth of experience and knowledge is going to be the superpower of any organization. This heterogeneity of employees is really the critical key to making sure that your organization is able to avoid some of those pitfalls of hiring for culture fit. Why is diversity profitable? It increases so many things that organizations care about. A bunch of them are listed here, but there's more than could even fit on this slide. The idea is, unlike homogeneous teams that are likely to descend into groupthink, where everyone's coming up with the same decision, and it's just a bunch of yes people all saying, yeah, that sounds good, that's what we did last year, that makes sense. You're able to be more productive and creative and innovative because you're all coming at a problem from different perspectives. You'll find that problem-solving speed is much quicker and that you're really able to come up with much more creative solutions to the problems. You also will make better decisions. You'll make them faster because you'll be able to tackle everything from every angle. And folks will feel really engaged. Instead of feeling like they could have not attended a meeting or not been on an email chain because 12 other people had the same opinion, they'll start to feel valued for the unique perspective and the diverse angle that they bring to any problem or decision or brainstorming session. That engagement is going to be critical into their retention variables. It's a really important component of why people stay. They stay because they feel they're providing a unique value contribution. And if you have a diverse workforce, it's a much easier sell that somebody is uniquely valuable because there's nobody else on the team quite like them. Okay, let's take a pause and do a quick poll as a reality check. So let me move this down into the window here so you can see it. How much more profitable do you think a diverse board makes an American business on average? So I've tried to sell you on the idea that diversity will make your company money. I want to give you a very small example of just the scale of money that we're talking about here. So take a second. There is a right answer to this poll, I promise. Give you another few seconds to answer. Is it 23%, 58%, or 95%? Okay, everyone has their votes locked in. Moment of truth. Okay, so the answers here, it looks like most of you went for 58%, the safe middle vote. You've all taken standardized tests before, I see. And we've got a few outliers both on the 23 and the 95 side of things. So let's see what the answer actually is. McKinsey did a study on exactly this. They wanted to know how much more profitable a diverse board was than a non-diverse board. And here's what they found. So for those of you who answered either 58 or 95%, you are both correct, depending on which variable here we're talking about. So there's two different statistics they measured. The first was returns on equity, which increased by 95%. And the second was margins on earnings, and that increased by 58%. So what I wanted to demonstrate with this is just how incredibly powerful diversity can be for your bottom line. I always say that it's great to implement diversity into your organization as a moral imperative. That's fantastic if that's a critical part of your business model, of your core mission statement, of your goals as an organization. I always think that's wonderful. But if you can't get internal stakeholders on board that way, you can always show them stats like these. Over and over again in lots of different studies that you can find publicly available, we've shown in social sciences that diversity is profitable for your bottom line. Having a diverse workforce, again, in that most basic sense of the word, will make your company more money for all of those reasons that we discussed previously. So hopefully you're sold on that by now. And if that's not enough to get you on board and to get your internal stakeholders on board with this diversity angle, here's a little bonus slide for you. 70% of job seekers are saying that diversity matters to them in their next job. And 32% are unwilling to even apply to a job where the workforce is not diverse. So if you're a company that's struggling with your funnel in this mode of great resignation and reshuffling that we've entered, then this is definitely a way to try to tackle that by making sure that you're making yourself appealing to as many folks as possible. So how do we grow this culture fit without damaging our goals for diversity? Hopefully by this point, I've convinced you that culture fit really is important, that diversity really is important, and that the two need to somehow coexist peacefully. You need to build a heterogeneous workforce that somehow still embodies the cultural values and principles of your organization. So, how do we do that? The theme of how we do that you'll see over and over again for the rest of the slides we have today is that structure is essential. It is critical to be structured in the way that you approach this. The problem isn't the bias inside of this idea of culture fit. The problem is if you let the bias have free reign. If you let your own bias as a recruiter, as a hiring manager, run the show in terms of who you're getting in, you're always going to have an issue with this culture fit being restrictive and counterproductive instead of the platform for growth and success. It's really important that you take a structured approach to this that keeps everything as objective and consistent and systematic as possible. There are a couple ways that we can do that. The first step in structuring this culture fit journey is defining your culture. What are the principles, or values, or skills that are what makes your organization unique? What makes you tick? What is it juxtaposed to any other organization that makes you uniquely you as an organization? Instead of thinking about the whole constellation of a person that you come in that seems successful, think about the ingredients that make up somebody like that. What is it that they're really good at that you're looking for? Try to distill down that abstract idea of culture to some very concrete things that you really need to anchor on and recruit for. This is a critical first step to do thoughtfully and with all relevant stakeholders. What we find with the clients that we work with is that sometimes these conversations really haven't been had in a systematic manner in organizations. Everybody is working from a different set of assumptions, and if they haven't been aired out loud together, you can't find where the differences are. That brings us to structure type 2, refining your culture. It's inevitable that different levels of your organization, different teams in your organization, maybe different sites or offices in your organization, if you're spread out or over more than one location, will have different ideas about what culture is. That's okay. Ultimately, you can decide on some things that are important and universal across your organization, and some things that may vary team to team. The important part is that you say these things out loud and that you structure the cultural definitions clearly and concisely. It's important because it really will help guide hiring decisions in a systematic manner. Team A can have different cultural fit than Team B, and that's okay. But it's important to establish what those different soft skills or values that you're looking for in each of those teams, so that the hiring process doesn't feel biased and arbitrary, and it doesn't allow any biases or prejudices or preconceived notions in any of these different teams to run wild. It will also help the recruiter. If a recruiter is tasked for recruiting for more than one team, and each team has unique ideas about what makes someone successful on that team, it's going to be critically important that the recruiter understands the differences of how each team should be staffed. Once you start refining the culture, you'll probably uncover a fair amount of disagreement, even among stakeholders in the same team or the same level or the same office. That's a normal part of this process, and it's really important to hash these things out before you start hiring and before you start promoting these cultural principles and values. It's also important to take a deep breath and a good self-reflective look at whether there's any bias embedded in any of the cultural values that you're coming up with. Really think about that. By bias, I mean adverse impact. And by that, I just mean any undue advantage or disadvantage for any kind of demographic group. Just because there's some bias embedded in a concept doesn't mean you put it there on purpose, doesn't mean you want it to be there, and it doesn't mean that that's who you are as an organization. It's much, much better to be proactive about eradicating bias from your cultural values and your hiring process than have it sit in there undetected and have a problem post hoc once you've already made a bunch of hires. So now it's time for quick poll number 2. Having heard about some of these structured conversations that we think at Cangrade is important for your organization to have, how many of you have already had those? We find that it's a really mixed bag with our clients. A lot of them have never had them, some have them all the time, and most are somewhere in between. So how many structured conversations about what culture fit means have you personally been involved in at your current organization? So not your previous one, just your current one. Give you a minute to answer. Okay. So this is quite the nice spread here, and you can see exactly what I just described, basically. Every organization is at a different stage of this journey. And whether you're on the side of the spectrum where you've had 0 conversations, or whether you're on the side of the spectrum where you've had a one conversation a week for the past 3 years, it's really important that you're having these conversations in a structured manner. And quite frankly, that you're having them at all. So for those of you who've already had one, you're already, on your way towards making sure that this is going smoothly. These conversations themselves can be a little fraught with tension and can unearth sometimes a lot of different preconceived notions and can create in the short term a bit of conflict. But long term, it's going to be so incredibly helpful and healthy for your organization. And it's going to make sure that everybody's crystal clear on who's going to be successful and thrive in your organization. There's a third type of structure that is going to lead into our next part of our presentation today. The third type of structure that helps you merge your goals for culture fit and diversity is this idea of evaluating your culture. Once you all agree on what you're looking for or come up with some basic level of agreement, you're going to need a systemic way to measure it. It's all well and good to decide that attention to detail and grit and follow through are critical components of what it takes to be a successful sales rep at your organization. But that doesn't help unless you know how to identify those things in your talent pool. Being able to identify the soft skills and values that you're looking for in the candidate pool that's approaching you for any given role is going to be a key component to making sure that you're able to build this culture that you want. Whether this culture is aspirational, as in something that you're reaching for that you're not quite there yet, but you want to make sure your new hires are in alignment with that culture, or whether it's realistic for a situation in your organization that is already present, where you have maybe a pressure cooker environment and people need to be able to perform well under pressure, in fact, have a preference for high pressure situations and not be put off by that. Whatever it is, it's important that your expectations of the soft skills and values of the candidates coming in align with where you're trying to go or where you are as an organization. So, how do we do that? How do we assess culture fit objectively? The first step to this is to identify what makes an employee thrive in your world. At Cangrade, we always say that there's no perfect personality profile, too much alliteration, that makes someone a good worker. There's no set of characteristics that means you'll be good at any job you try. But there is a perfect personality profile for your particular organization and your particular role. There is no perfect customer service representative personality. That simply doesn't exist. And any company that tells you different hasn't really done the research. There is a perfect personality, however, for a customer service representative at your particular organization. And if you have two kinds of customers, maybe you have a B2B sales and you have B2C sales, so you have two different customer bases, there are potentially more than one customer service rep personality for each of your customer bases. If you're talking about something where you have in-person retail stores, there could be different personality profiles for your stores in California versus your stores in New York. Different kinds of traits and culture might develop in those two locations that are unique. The first step is being able to identify what that is. And that will come from those conversations that you've had but it also will come with an assessment. An assessment will allow you a structured look at an individual candidate's set of traits and personality qualities. The question bank you use for this assessment should be consistent across candidates and targeted at the components that will matter most in the role. Relying on an assessment means you ask the same questions the same way of all people that come into your funnel. So what kind of clues might you see that someone might be right for you? Again, competencies, soft skills, and personality. If these match your culture, you've found your next great hire. What will the impact be if you're able to do this correctly? The impact is that you're going to be able to get people jobs that they love and that they're good at. Normally, when we talk about attrition, it's a reactive kind of conversation, not a proactive one. And even in the case that it is proactive, it's thought about as a post-hire problem. What I'd like to suggest here is that we can begin tackling the problem of attrition before the hire is even made. By increasing the likelihood of job fit, understanding the motivations of the candidate, and so on, you can pick someone more inclined to thrive in your environment and start preparing to make sure they stay engaged in the role and the organization. So by leaning on that assessment that looks at competencies, soft skills, and personality traits, pre-hire, you'll be able to pick employees that will thrive in your culture. And post-hire, you'll be able to optimize the current employees on your team culture level. So what do I mean by this? As we talked about earlier in the webinar, pre-hire, you're going to want to pick the best matching employees for your organization. Who is it that matches to the culture that you already have in place? You're able, as a recruiter, to say, hey, this person would be better on team A or team B. Or if they have translatable hard skills, maybe they'd be better in this function versus that function. And you can kind of move them around to where they fit best in your organization. The idea is that you'll be able to do this post-hire as well, because you'll have, again, all that same data objectively measured for the different values and soft skills and competencies that make someone a good fit for the culture. Or let's say you're building a brand new team. You don't have anybody on that team yet, but you have a really strong sense of what you want them to be good at. You can go into your current employee base when you're doing a reorg and try to pull people's profiles who look like they might be a really good fit for this new team you're building out. It allows you to evaluate people for culture fit internally as well, post-hire, where you're able to optimize their fit into your organization so that they are feeling the most included and valued in the team that they're present in, and that you're able to leverage the best work out of them possible. I think this post-hire component is important and can be overlooked. Sometimes when someone's hired into a role, you'll hear either, oh, they're just not a good fit for the culture, and so on and so forth. They don't work with our culture. They're not a good cultural fit. But the reality is, as we talked about earlier, it's rare that there's one monolithic culture across an organization. Each team or location or functionality tends to have some similarities overall, but also a variety of unique characteristics that may bring out the best or the worst in folks that make up that team. If someone isn't seeming like a good culture fit for a team who's already been hired, a great way to try to retain them and increase their performance is to put them on a team where they fit in culture-wise a bit better. This allows you not to lose people to attrition who you could otherwise retain with a simple optimization move. And again, those assessment answers are going to be a critical part of that. It's going to be very important that you have an objective way to look across all the candidates and all the current employees to evaluate them on a level playing field. The goal of that, obviously, is to eliminate that adverse impact. It's really important that nobody be given an unfair advantage or disadvantage. This brings us to our next and final poll. What is the biggest roadblock to adopting an HR tech solution for culture fit in your organization? We're about to launch into how we think this is the way forward. And we've talked a little bit about how we think assessments are the best way to keep things objective and systematic. So, from your perspective, as the professionals in the room, what's the biggest roadblock in the way to an organization actually rolling something like that out? Give you a few more seconds to answer here. I know we're making you only pick one. Sorry, there's no all of the above option. Okay. So here are the answers to this poll from folks. It looks like the two top concerns here are getting buy-in from leadership and budgetary constraints. It's always critical with HR tech solutions to make sure that the person holding the budget is bought in to the priority. Sometimes the tricky thing about HR is that HR doesn't necessarily control the budget for its own initiatives, and you'd have to go to another area or sector of your organization to get that buy-in. HR is basically the center and the heart of an organization and around which everything else turns. So it's critical, again, from both a return on your investment perspective and just a cultural health of the organization perspective to adopt the tech tools that you need to get this done. Hopefully, some of the stats that we've shared with you today and some of the different research we walked through will help you to have those conversations internally. So, how do you evaluate culture fit in a structured manner at scale? This at scale bit at the end here is really important as a component. Doing something at scale is a lot different from just doing it one or two times. If you wanted to evaluate someone's culture fit, you only had 2 candidates come through a week, it's no problem, right? You can schedule lots of deep dive interviews with them, spend a lot of time, be very thoughtful. But when you're doing it at scale, when you have hundreds or thousands of potential candidates coming through for your roles daily or weekly or monthly, whatever it is, it's critical that you're able to keep up and still objectively and systematically evaluate them for culture fit. The idea that this happens over time is also really important. It's tremendously difficult for humans to stay consistent in how they're evaluating candidates over time. So now that I've daunted you with the problem, what's the answer? The answer from our perspective is embracing AI technology. AI technology is just able to assess things more consistently and more quickly than humans can. So why don't we all use this? What's the roadblock? The first major roadblock that we talk about when we talk about AI technology is this idea of the ick factor. There's a concern that there might not be enough humanity in AI technology, that somehow AI technology is taking humanity out of human resources and making it robotic. There's the concern that in this scenario, there might not be enough of that sort of human touch in the process, and that nobody wants to interact with a robot in terms of their recruiting journey. But I'd like to caution you not to idealize humanity when it comes to decision making. Humans have hundreds and hundreds of biases that have been identified by social psychologists that are hardwired in. Why do we have these biases? Because we're not very good at making decisions at scale. Moreover, we're slow. We're slow decision makers. If you think about how long it takes you to buy a plane ticket or even choose what kind of ice cream when you're in the frozen food aisle, we're not quick when it comes to making choices. If you're able to make a quick decision about something like what ice cream you want to buy, it's because you have a heuristic about it. I like vanilla. I like Ben and Jerry's. You narrow down the choices that you have to a smaller set of choices to speed up that process. Oh, I remember I got this ice cream last week and I liked it. I'm going to buy it again. Oh, I got this ice cream last week. It was good, but I want to try a different flavor. This one's next to it. I'll take that one. If you're able to make a quick choice, it's because you've developed some sort of heuristic that helps you through it. Biases that humans have about other humans are no different. If you went to a certain university and you hire people who also went there, it's because you think positively of the educational experience that you have, right? You're not doing it because you don't like people from other universities. You just don't know them. If you're buying Ben and Jerry's more than 1 week in a row in the ice cream aisle, it's not because you hate Haagen-Dazs necessarily. It's just you know that you like Ben and Jerry's. These are the kinds of ways that humans make decisions. And we do this because we need to quicken the process. And because we absolutely can't consider all of the pieces of information at once. It's too overwhelming. If you let in all of the different bits of information and all of the different aspects and components of making a choice when it comes to prioritizing one candidate over another candidate, it is paralyzing. There are too many unique aspects of what makes a human being, too many different personality traits and competencies and quirks that make up each individual human and each individual candidate to be able for a human brain to evaluate them consistently, objectively, and systematically, even one-on-one, let alone at scale. So all of this goes to say, just because a human decision-making process is human, quote unquote, doesn't mean that it's helpful or superior to one that's driven by a machine or by artificial intelligence. The sheer processing speed and the amount of things that an AI algorithm is able to consider is just dramatically different from what the human brain can tackle. Okay, so if we've gotten rid of that objection, why else? Why else not to use AI technology? The second concern is engineered stupidity. This we talk about as not enough humanity, but now too much humanity. The concern with this is that if you have an artificial intelligence process that's built on human knowledge, human data, and human information, that it can go horribly wrong. Let's talk through a few examples of this. What's the danger of AI learning from humans? Data that is generated by humans may have those same biases baked in. Let's talk through a few real-life examples of this. The first can be taken from the medical field. An algorithm was developed using more than 200 million data points from hospitals across the US. So 200 million patients in US hospitals to predict which patients were more likely to need extra medical care. Unfortunately, what the algorithm ended up predicting was just that white patients needed more medical attention than Black patients. Obviously, this isn't the case. It's just potentially reflective in differences in care that already exist in hospitals. However, if this algorithm had actually been implemented in terms of decision-making processes in medical care for who got care and how you prioritized and how you triage different folks, you would have had the situation where you would have created a tremendous amount of adverse impact, a tremendous amount of disadvantage for your non-white patients. Obviously, this wasn't the goal, and this algorithm was never actually put into practice. But it was critically important that it was flagged as an issue and that these demographics were noted when they were developed. The reason that this bias was created was not because the artificial intelligence itself had any motivation in terms of, which ethnicity to prioritize or what to do around that, but simply because it learned from the data that it was available to it. It learned from the data provided to it by humans. The next example is from the US court systems. An algorithm developed for the US court system predicted the likelihood that a defendant would become a repeat offender. The same sort of thing happened. Again, the algorithm essentially predicted twice as many false positives for repeat offenses for Black offenders than it did for white offenders. It learned, again, to be biased against Black defendants in the justice system as opposed to white defendants. Again, this algorithm was never put into place. This was not the goal. But when you were looking to figure out who was going to repeat offend, this was what happened because it learned on a biased set of data that was provided. Third and final example we'll talk through. Amazon wanted to figure out who to hire, something a little closer to home in the HR sector. Amazon did a study to create an algorithm to predict who was going to be a successful hire simply from scanning their resume. So it had an AI algorithm scanning resume, looking for keywords, and then predicting whether they get hired or not. What this algorithm learned was not to hire women. This was simply because more men had been hired overall by Amazon in the training data set. What the algorithm learned was every time it saw the word women or women's or woman or saw a female college, not to hire that person. Again, Amazon noticed this before any sort of algorithm was put into place in terms of screening their candidates, and this was never used, and they've been very open about it to their credit in terms of not rolling this out. But this scare is very real, and it's a critical one from an organizational perspective and from a human resources perspective. AI has the capacity to do a tremendous amount of good, but it also has the capacity to do a tremendous amount of harm. It's really, really important that your AI is learning on good data. The danger here of this engineered stupidity, the danger that it might learn on biased data, it's up to you as the consumer of this AI tech and of these HR tech solutions to make sure that whatever your data you're feeding it, whether it's your internal data or whether the company you're working with as a solution provider is using big data, that you've done the work to make sure there's not bias baked into the data. An AI solution is only as good as the data that's provided to it. So really make sure that you hold your solution providers accountable. It's not good enough for them to just assure you that there's no bias in there. Ask them follow-up questions about what they're doing and how. If they can't explain it or articulate it to you in a clear and understandable manner, that's not on you, that's on them. And if they can't articulate it, chances are they haven't done the work to make sure that everything is okay. I can't stress enough here how much worse bad data is than no data. If you're not using data at all, then you're not making decisions on the same sort of scale. If you're feeding in bad data, there's this sense of false confidence that you're making objective decisions. They'll be systematic, but they won't be objective. And you don't want to be one of these cautionary tales that I just talked through with you about how data that has bias baked into it essentially crippled the output. When this is implemented at scale in an HR process and in your organization, that can be a huge, huge problem. Overall, unethical AI can do a lot of harm. And by unethical AI, I mean AI that hasn't been properly vetted to make sure that it's not part of the problem instead of part of the solution. AI that can't ensure that it's contributing to adverse impact and distributing bias across your processes. The reason that it can do a lot of harm is the same reason it can do a lot of good. It's faster. It will make as many decisions as it can as quickly as possible. And you just want to make sure that those decisions are not just systematic, that they're objective. And the best way to do that is to feed it great data. Ethical AI is built on two things. The first is this bias-free data. But the second is equally important. You really want to avoid black box solutions. This is what I touched on earlier a little bit when I was saying you need to take your solution providers to task if they can't explain or articulate what it is that they're doing for you and how. But in general, you really want to be able to see into the tech solutions and the AI solutions that you're using in talent management. It's not just in the sale and in the initial conversations before rollout that you want to be able to ask hard questions. It's all the way through that process. You want the AI algorithms and tech solutions that you're using to give you a constant stream of feedback so that you are able to understand its decision-making process as an artificial intelligence process. You also want to be able to have the opportunity to create that feedback loop the other way. You want to be able to feed your artificial intelligence solution new data, new insights, new priorities, new values, new soft skills that you've decided are critical for a team or for your organization as a whole. That feedback loop and maintaining that feedback loop is going to be critical for making sure that you're always bringing the best possible solution to bear in terms of your artificial intelligence tech. The main ingredient here is this idea of communication. Just because you have a robot or artificial intelligence helping you out doesn't mean that they stay in your lane, they are in their lane and you stay in yours and you never interact. Some of the greatest artificial tech that's been developed are robots and artificial intelligence engines that involve a large degree of human interaction. There's a classic example of a mail delivering robot that is great at taking the mail, picking up the mail, carrying it to the elevator, dropping off at whatever office it needs. It's a brilliant, easy piece of tech to build. There's only one problem with this robot. It doesn't have arms. It doesn't have arms because they're complicated and expensive to build, so it can't figure out how to push the elevator button. What it can do is roll itself over to the elevator and ask a human in its politest robot voice to push the elevator button for it. Robots and artificial intelligence aren't designed to work in a vacuum. They aren't designed to be a black box. They're best designed to have a level of human interaction that makes them smarter and makes you smarter. In the same way that the robot that delivers your mail can take care of the grunt work so that nobody needs to be running up and down stairs, keep dropping off mail at somebody's desk. A pre-hire assessment that focuses on the qualities that underlie culture fit can do a lot of the grunt work for you in terms of objectively evaluating those qualities, while allowing you to focus on the deep dive moments when you've narrowed it down to just a few people. Like we said earlier, humans need more time to make choices. Give yourself and your team the time to make those decisions around culture fit. You need that leeway. You need that bandwidth increase. Let the AI do the grunt work part that requires making these volume of decisions and requires making decisions at scale. It's really important that you understand the processes and that there's that interaction. Yes, there's the things that the artificial intelligence is good at, and yes, there's things that humans are good at. But it's also really important that that conversation and that feedback loop between them continues. Only in this way will you be able to build the culture fit you want for your organization. So, what are the takeaways overall before we jump to Q&A? Culture fit is critical. Assessing it incorrectly can be damaging. And understanding your current culture is the first step to growing it. Overall, psychometrics and artificial intelligence are going to help you assess this culture fit objectively and systematically to make sure that you make faster decisions about who to hire in an objective and non-biased way. All right, now that we've talked through all kinds of different aspects of culture fit, how to build it, and how to make sure it's not opposed to your diversity goals, let's jump into the questions that you've had over the course of the presentation.
All righty. One question we had from the registrants was, how do you describe culture versus climate or work environment and the differences between them?
That's a great question. So I think that when we talk about, those two words are really used interchangeably, right? And I think incorrectly so. I think culture, from my perspective as a social scientist and organizational psychologist, is something much more intentional. The climate of an organization can be much more of a passive situation, but culture is an intentional set of values or principles or skills that you think are critical to the DNA of what makes your company a particularly unique company or organization. The climate can just be how something is moment to moment, and it's not necessarily an intentional move on the part of strategic leadership.
Awesome. Thank you. And we just had a question come through from Anna. How do we foster culture in this virtual world?
Such a good question. I think that the virtual world, right, has made everything just that little bit harder. When you're talking about fostering culture as being predictive of retention, I think Anna's right on with that being a real issue for some organizations. Because the thing about in-person work is that it allows companies and organizations to be a little bit sloppier about the way that they promote culture, because culture kind of promotes itself, right? If it allows that blurring between culture and climate, because the climate is a certain way and that probably aligns with the culture. And so you're able to just sort of have the people kind of steeped in it if they're sitting in the workplace next to people. When they go remote, I think, again, you have to be, it's about intentionality. You have to be much more intentional about those communications. And you have to figure out ways to emphasize that and also to reward it. I think sometimes companies will say something like, oh, we really value follow through. It's really important to us. But there's no monetization of that at all. In fact, they don't value follow through, or we really value teamwork. But instead, what they value is just cold hard cash. If you're a salesperson who closes more deals, you get a higher commission than someone who spends lots of hours helping their fellow salespeople close deals. Well, that's not consistent with what you're telling people your culture is. So it's about really walking the walk and not just talking the talk, about thinking about how you reward and compensate folks. And that doesn't have to be monetarily, right? I think the beautiful thing about technology like Slack and different kinds of interactive platforms, workforce management platforms, is you can really publicly call out things that people did well that align with your values. And when it's virtual, when it's on something like a group Slack channel, it really makes it quite visible. If one of your values is that people are able to let things go when they need to let them go, make sure that when they do that, that the manager reaches out and says, that's good, I know, really wasn't going anywhere. It's great that you were able to let it go. Sometimes it's about celebrating the little wins vocally. It doesn't have to be with a bonus check. and making sure that everybody understands that your values aren't just something you write down and laminate and hang on the wall, but something that really structures how it is that you're engaging with folks on a daily and weekly and monthly basis.
Definitely. That's very insightful. Thank you, Leanna. We have a couple questions about AI. The first one is, how should we go about implementing AI into our HR processes if we've never used it before?
It's a great question. So it can be daunting, that first foray into AI, especially if from an HR background, that's just not something that you're really familiar with or that you've worked with a lot before. I think the first step is, again, having some of these conversations with stakeholders in your organization, with folks that maybe own the budgetary strings that you're going to need, and saying, hey, here's why I think an AI solution could really help my team. And try to pose it as a business case. I think something that really resonates with strategic leadership teams is I have X number of headcount on my recruiting team, and we don't have enough time to vet candidates the way that we want. We need something that's going to do the grunt work up front so we can spend more meaningful time making sure we're not just filling seats, we're filling seats with the right folks. I think another great way is to just reach out to some different organizations for exploratory calls around this. Obviously, I'm biased. I work for Cangrade, so full disclosure there. I think our solution is the best in the market, rightfully so, right? You gotta stump for your own team. But don't take my word for it. There are tons of folks in this space. We're in a very crowded space in terms of AI tech in the HR marketplace. Talk to a few different ones and have them articulate for you how you can help bring AI in as a newbie in this space, because they're going to help you do some of that heavy lifting. They're going to give you some of the collateral you need to get buy-in from your stakeholders. And you should be able to lean on a good solutions provider and try out a few different ones just in terms of having those conversations so that you can start to understand what makes your situation unique and what are the different sorts of ways that AI could be integrated. There's always a range of solutions, from lighter touch to heavier touch, from a lower budget SaaS product to a higher budget consultative product. And it's really important to feel out where in the spectrum might work for you and your unique goals. And that's on the solution providers to articulate that. So that's the nice thing about being the buyer of the AI tech. You get to make them do some of the work for you.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And to go with that, how can we trust AI is a follow-up question.
Oh, that's a great question. You shouldn't trust AI. You should always make sure that, if the burden of proof is on AI to ensure you that it's trustworthy. That's why I talked about that constant feedback loop as being important. You don't want to just, set AI up in the corner and then say, press the on button like a washing machine and have it just run. If you do that, you might get situations like we talked about today with the medical situation, the legal situation, Amazon, where it's just making crazy decisions and you have no insight into what's happening and you really won't be pleased with the outcome. So I would always err on the side of not trusting AI and making sure it's transparent AI, that you can literally see what it's doing and how it's making the choices, and that it's spitting out all kinds of information about how it's bias-free and objective and all that good stuff. It should never be a black box. It should be a lovely glass transparent box where you can see exactly how it's thinking and why and what's happening as a result. Wonderful. Time for one more?
I think we can get through one more with one more minute. Last one. All right. We have, do you have any tips for how to better understand our organization's goals and values?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the short answer is structure. When you approach those conversations, come up with a list of structured questions before you sit down and try to lead it a little bit like a focus group where you're really making sure that everybody's answering the same question. You could also use a Google form before that conversation to get everybody's wheels turning and make sure that everybody comes with different kinds of ideas and there's that wiggle room and freedom to come to the brainstorming session with different ideas, because you don't want everyone to just nod their head after the first person talks.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Leanna.
Absolutely.
I'd like to thank our presenter as well as all of you for joining us today. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archived recording will be available on the hr.com website within 24 hours. The webcast credit will show in your hr.com account within 2 business days, and we'll also send you an email with your credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.